You're listening to This British Life podcast, conversations with interesting people.
Anna Motz. It is Motz?
Yes.
Where does the name Motz come from?
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi.
I'm just talking.
So Motz is an Austrian name,
Oh.
but my parents were Austrian Jews, so it's...
Is it abbreviated or just Motz?
That's the full name.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of like splot or plot.
Okay.
It's nice and short.
So how do you describe yourself? Is it a forensic psychologist or is it something else?
So I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist and a psychotherapist.
Right, okay. And I was asking Charles, I'm not sure if it was correct, what
It probably wasn't.
what forensic psychologist means.
So basically, forensic refers to the courts.
Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah, so I would see people who have come through the courts, so
Yeah.
in the criminal justice system. So people who've committed crimes for reasons of psychological disturbance or mental illness.
And forensic, that doesn't hold true with everything, does it, the word forensic, or does it?
Well,
You say forensic something, forensic.
You mean like sort of in forensics as in criminal
Yeah.
fingerprints or DNA?
That all refers to the court, does it, forensic? I thought it was about specific
I
forensic.
suppose it does, yeah.
I suppose it can be multiple meanings.
Yeah.
Could you just give us a background about your education and career, like leading up to doing the job?
Sure. Yeah. So I started out, well, actually, I grew up in New York as well as then coming to England and having dual nationality. But I worked with kids with emotional disturbances. And that was really interesting because I saw lots of violence that was definitely not with an intention to be cruel, but just an expression of their kind of, their distress really. So that was in high school. And then I went to university and I studied philosophy and psychology. But I knew that psychology was where my heart was.
Right, yeah. And the background you come from, what was that like?
Well, yeah. Where do you...
as a child, was it a nice background? It wasn't something that...
Well, it was really interesting because my parents were both forced to leave Europe, so Austria, because of being Jewish. And they had me kind of late in life. So my father actually remembered the Nazis coming into Vienna, into the university, and kicking out all the Jewish students, all the socialist students. So he emigrated, went to Russia, then went to Ireland, then to England. But my mother's family stayed in Vienna for, I think it was 3 years under Nazi rule until they escaped to the US. So in my background, there's a definite sense of what, the horror that people can inflict on one another and persecution.
How long until you came along after the Nazis coming into...
Well, I was born in 1964. So that's like
so you went
24 years or something.
And so 20 years later on, when you become an adult, did you ever speak to them about that? Like, how did it come about?
Yeah, my mother told me a lot about growing up, even before the Nazis came to power, about being discriminated against, about the kind of anti-Semitism in her school. And really interestingly, she felt that she was quite like immune or impervious to what people thought about Jews, but other people started to take on the projections and become quite kind of fearful and, appearing weak. So they fulfilled the kind of stigmas that were given to them, which is a really interesting psychological phenomenon. If you tell someone they're really bad and really, unwanted, they start to feel it and even can start to behave like that.
Yeah.
Well, if you treat someone like an animal, they might bite you. Kind of
absolutely.
Thing.
That's a great way of putting it.
Oh God, right, so there's so much I wanted to ask. So your last book, I'm dyslexic. If Love Could Kill.
That's the US title is If Love Could Kill.
Yeah, that's why I was getting confused. And what was the other title?
A Love That Kills.
Oh, right, yeah, because I thought it was a different book.
It kind of is because I had to change stuff.
Oh, you
to
did?
make it more accessible to the US audience. And
more, like what?
So to put in some big cases that the US public would be familiar with, and also kind of controversially talk about the new anti-abortion laws.
Right. Okay.
So it has a much more political dimension, which has caused...
Because when did it come out? It was last year.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So it's
just
quite contemporary with abortion.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you've written a lot of books. You've done a few.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
But mainly they were for a more specialist readership. So psychologists, social workers, probation, judges, that kind of group. Whereas this is meant to be for the interested general reader who really wants to understand why women can do such brutal things and unexpected.
I was listening to it and I go, oh, I know somebody like that.
Oh, do you?
Like that. Yeah, I come from a bit of a bad background myself, so it was. I mean, it was. I was thinking, I wonder if they know that now, like that because I knew it was a while ago, and I think, yep, definitely. And sometimes I know quite explicit things about people's background, especially when you're growing up in like shared accommodation, you're younger, and everyone's got a problem about something, and it becomes quite normal because every day there's stuff going on, and whether it's somebody killing themselves or somebody's arrested for this and somebody's attacked somebody, so it almost became quite normal.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And a big thing was obviously that like abuse during childhood.
Yeah.
And it's still, even though it's obvious that when you hear someone like yourself talk about it, you just think it's such an obvious problem to sort out childhood rather than deal with all the ramifications 20 years later. But it's like almost all the problem is the childhood bit, but we don't spend any time really sorting that out. But we spend a lot of money sorting the back end of it out. Because especially coming from my background, it became the norm that everyone was abused in one way or the other. It was almost the norm, like so-and-so was abused there, that person abused by that. And it was just, I was thinking, I'm sure it still goes more on than people think. But again, you only hear the end part of the arrests and old childhood, this and this happened at childhood. You go, but nothing ever gets sorted out at the beginning bit. So I'll get back to your career generally, but I just wanted to ask is, if I said to you, think now about your career, who comes to mind? Obviously, there's a few people, but was there a story that, or someone that something worked or something didn't work or something that was extreme or something? What comes to mind when you think back over your career?
Well, I think so exactly like you're saying that the problems start with childhood.
It's just child as the constant. So
absolutely. So the trauma, the neglect, the abuse, but also societal trauma. So people who are racially abused, people who live in poverty. And of course, we know that those risk factors tend to build on one another. So if somebody is born into a very deprived kind of neighborhood, then they're going to have fewer educational opportunities. There may be more kind of those generational patterns of neglect and abuse that keep repeating.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the kids I think about, because I did placements in Charles and Family in inner London, and there was a little boy who I kind of have to admit, I kind of fell in love with him because he was so sweet and so fragile, but also he did this thing where he impersonated a werewolf, and he, so that was the reason apparently why he and his family were referred. But actually his mother had abandoned the family and had made lots of suicide attempts. So he felt like totally furious and, very, very helpless. So he was this little tiny boy, but he acted like this big wild animal, and then he could scare people. So I worked with him in psychotherapy for about 6 months, and it was really hard to leave him.
Yeah.
But in fact, he started to draw and to write. And then when he expressed himself in that way, he stopped needing to do this other kind of more aggressive behavior. And that was like, wow, this stuff can actually work. And I also worked with his other family members. So they were all grieving the loss of this mother. So that was, I guess, a really important moment. And then I had my final placement in training with in a secure unit. And I just met mainly men, but a couple of women, but all the people who would never, ever, ever have gone to their doctors and said, I need psychology, I need psychotherapy. They had grown up in really traumatic, often single parent households, but, like violence, like you're saying, that it was the norm. And so a little psychotherapy, a little psychological work just went a long, long way.
Yeah.
Especially, interestingly, because I specialized in women, but a lot of the men just used anger. That was their default, violence, anger. That's how they got rid of really horrible feelings. So in a way, part of the work was getting them, this sounds really weird, but getting them to feel sadder and more depressed and talk about those vulnerable feelings. And, like lots of violence seemed to come from, I don't want to curse on your show.
No, you can.
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
So-
Philly boots.
So people walk down the street and they think, he's calling me a cunt. He thinks I'm a cunt. I'm going to show him who's a cunt.
Yeah.
And then they would react because they felt shamed and humiliated. And actually, nobody was actually thinking that. They're probably thinking he's a bit scary, he's intimidating, or maybe he is a bit of a jerk.
Yeah.
But they were so convinced that they were being shamed and humiliated, they had to retaliate with violence.
Yes, I sort of met a guy who wrote we wrote this film actually called Startup.
Oh yeah, I love that. I've done a talk with him.
Oh right, yeah. So yes, I've sort of
Sorry, we're just turning headphones down. So that'll do for me. That's fine. Yeah.
turn mine down a bit.
It's kind of
So technical.
Yeah.
That's
fine.
Bit technical.
Are your
issues there.
headphones okay? We didn't do a check.
it is very loud. But
Yeah, thank you very much. So yes, the chap who, well, as you know, he wrote, met him once or twice, a couple of times actually. And yes, he was talking about, because he did a lot of work in prisons and in particularly sort of high risk, I suppose.
High security,
sort of Cat A stuff. It's,
Yeah.
So violent offenders. And he focused a lot on the shame response. That was his thing that he was talking about a lot. And he was just like, basically, people feel slighted. People can feel very slighted over nothing, microaggressions or whatever, or something, or a slight thing, or maybe someone goes, things that you wouldn't even perceive. People can just feel very slighted, and then they feel shamed, and then they react very violently.
Yeah.
And that's and it was this thing of trying to recognize this. They sort of had these groups and stuff, and they were sort of getting these guys together and talking therapy thing. And I don't know the technical terms, by the way, as you might know, realize. But it was really interesting because, yes, it was trying to deal with that, and they were trying to recognize that in themselves, and they were saying, and they were trying to sort of, okay, you're not disrespecting me, you're not, you're not trying to put me down. I get that, and this is maybe my reaction. So really interesting film, Startup. I would recommend that.
Oh.
I do recommend it, and in fact, I think I've shown it with within the institutions I've worked in. And what's so beautiful about it is that, well, two things really strike me. So one is that the guy who wrote and directed it had himself been in boarding school in a very posh public school, and he said it's the same thing.
Oh, right.
It's really similar. It's like this total institution.
Yeah.
But also a really important moment in the movie is that the main character, who's just, he gets himself all greasy and oiled up so that no one can get him when he's attacking them. But he finds his long lost estranged father also in the prison.
Oh.
And so you get a lot about, what's gone on in these guys' lives. And the same for the women I work with, that's led to them using aggression and offending as a way of what I would say, like defending against being really sad and depressed.
Do women have, as you said, men, it just expresses itself in violence. You can almost see it easier in a strange way. So do women have a specific type of way of handling it? Does it become more, I don't say emotional, it becomes internalized, so maybe pops up in other ways, like breakdowns or things, because there is no immediate violent expression, so it has to pop up somewhere, and maybe it is. So it's things like, what's it called when the people take their children when they're not sick, but
Munchausen syndrome.
Wow.
Do you know,
We have a lady here who does quite.
Yeah, I was thinking, would that
yes.
be more of a woman's thing than a man? Because again, it's dealing with something where a man, it's a lot more obvious. Where with a woman it would pop up in things like that.
And we have an expert here, but it's also possibly to do with a bit more of the roles there, these sort of the gender roles. So it's about, in that instance, it's the the mother who's the caring role, and that's attention seeking with that. So that's specifically due to sort of ingrained gender roles.
And in your book, I'd forgotten. I mean, again, it's obvious, but you mentioned that what's BAM stand for? BAM, minorities, black and
Asian.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that you said black women specifically suffer worse because of societal stresses anyway. they get less help. They are more prone to being arrested than. And
yeah,
I'd
they're
forgotten
perceived as much more dangerous.
So that's a thing. Like they suffer more mentally.
Well, I think it's this whole thing which you've asked about, which is how violence and disturbance gets expressed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you're Freud. You're in what you've just said, which he said that women tend to internalize and turn that depression and anger against themselves. So they'll get very depressed, and men and boys will tend to get rid of those bad feelings outwards in aggression.
Somebody or exactly.
Yeah,
right, yeah.
So it's much more direct. It's kind of like a short, sharp shock. But of course, men also can harm themselves. But it's also who women have access to. And so women tend to be much less violent in public spheres. And, female aggression, although there's recently been a whole thing about girl gangs. But generally, women aren't out on the streets being violent. And you're much more likely to be attacked or be a perpetrator or a victim of violence as a young man than as a young woman. So where do women find their targets? Well, against themselves, like through high rates of self-harm, but also the people they have access to, so children. And what I write about a lot is that some of the mothers who've had really, really disturbed experiences of being parented haven't got a good model of how to cope with a child who won't stop crying. And they actually will see that kid as an extension of themselves. And if they're self-harming, they'll also harm the kid. Or like you're saying, they will go to hospitals and present this child with made up or either made up symptoms or symptoms they've created themselves through adding salt into their feed or other ways of creating really severe allergic reactions, which is what I describe in the book. And then appearing and presenting like this incredibly devoted mother who's out of her mind with worry. It's really, really hard for doctors and nurses and psychologists. We expect parents to be really concerned about their children. We don't expect that they are presenting them with made-up illnesses. And there's an amazing documentary that I've also written about, which is an American case, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, whose mother, Dee Dee, raised so much money, thousands and thousands of dollars, saying that Gypsy Rose had cancer and she had all these illnesses and she wheeled her around in a wheelchair, and the girl didn't have cancer. Mum had shaved her head. She could walk. So she was it's a grotesque kind of example. And then in the end, spoiler alert, but I'm sure that people who are aware of the story know that Gypsy Rose then killed her mother. And anyway, these are the kind of examples of what happens when female violence kind of goes underground and isn't detected. It can lead to explosive.
What were your sort of early days like when you first got involved? Was it like a waking of like when the tie hit the road? Oh, this is not what I expected, or did the education bring you into it well, or was it just something you had to sort of hit the road running?
It's a colleague once described, like when particularly working with child care proceedings and some of the backgrounds of the men and women I was working with. He said it's like the gates of hell have opened and you can never look back.
Yeah.
I thought, man, that's a really good description, because you just think, I cannot believe.
Yeah.
I often think, I can't believe this person sitting in front of me has survived this level of trauma, neglect, like things that you say it's normal, but things just such extreme acts of violence they've suffered. And then even the people who may have killed or raped or hurt people really badly, you can totally understand how it's happened, how it's developed in their minds that this is the only way of reacting.
It is strange because I grew up in a bit of a bad background, and I remember once just realizing there was a girl I knew. She was 19. She had 3 kids, 3 different dads. I was just thinking of a story. So her mum, she was in care, foster. What's it when they take you out and they get paid to look after? Is it foster?
Yeah.
So the foster was giving her like 20 quid a week, but keeping the money, and she used to drink a lot. The mum, I used to take her to, was in one of these alcoholic places where she had to be in at 7 o'clock, and they lock you in, and she got kicked out of there for bringing in alcoholic mouthwash. And they used to do something to get the alcohol out, and then they realised you don't need 7 bottles of so that was and she had 3 kids, different dads. And it became known that one of the kids was her dad's. And the reason she was kicked out was because she wouldn't tell the mum who the kid was. So out of empathy for the family, she didn't tell the mum, so got kicked out. And she was the nicest girl, even 19. And there was one moment, I was taking her somewhere, and she just went into the shop, and I was looking at whatever, and I just looked over, and she's in the shop, and I could see her smiling with the woman at the counter, and turned to say something to the woman behind her, and she smiled. And I thought, if you didn't know anything, that's a person in a shop. For what all that she's been through, it's just a person and it's just another person. And I always, from that moment, I always looked at people and thought, how many people are dealing with stuff? They're not all
absolutely.
Most people are. Most people
most
people have a sob story. It sounds diminishing it, but most people have something awful happen to them. You're a very lucky person if you reach an age of any age and you haven't had any serious massive curveball thrown at you in your life. You know what I mean?
You could just flick a switch on and you had things above everybody's head that was going through something, you'd go, what? Oh my God, everyone's. It would be abnormal to have nothing in your background.
It would be rare. You single out the one or two people who didn't have a trauma and be like, oh.
Yeah.
But I still think the quality of the traumatic experiences and the numbers of them and how they build on each other, it's still like, I've been maybe not accepted in a social group or been bad at when I moved from England to America. I couldn't play softball and that was really humiliating. I was like, where's the big rounders bat? I can't do this. But that's still, or even what my mother went through, it's bad, but it's still different from, I think, in and out of foster care, being sexually abused and raped by people who are meant to look after you. So I totally agree with you. When I work with my patients who've been, even when they've committed really serious crimes, they tend to be, it's such a weird thing to say, but they tend to be good people with a moral sense, but something awful has happened. Either they've recreated what's happened to them in a moment where they can't manage it anymore, or sometimes they were really delusional. And that's the other, you asked me what kind of stories I can remember. And in my very first placement, there was a woman who seemed a bit kind of strange and a bit floaty, and she was maybe in her 50s, and she'd actually killed her own baby because she thought he was possessed by Satan. And so that's the kind of thing where you just think, oh my God, but for the grace of God, go on. Like, imagine
the neurology just works for you, but it just didn't for them. Just
something happens, and you get this complete terrifying delusion that you have to kill to save.
Yeah,
and that's where the title of the the book comes from.
But what is it? What's the therapy when somebody's got sort of personality disorders? Because you can't talk out of that. Can you therapy out of that, or is it medicine?
Well, I'm really glad you asked. So I've been working for years in a particular therapy called mentalization-based therapy. And we've had trials with hundreds and hundreds of it's men who are diagnosed with antisocial personality disorders. So, committing really serious acts of violence and crimes. And it is a talking therapy, but it's not like where the therapist isn't human, doesn't give anything back. It's very interactive, and it's about helping people link their thoughts and feelings and know what happens at the moment before they lose it. And it's had really good results. And there are many therapies for personality difficulties and disorders, including groups. So you would probably be more effective, not putting myself down, but if you know what the guys have been through and you can really relate to it. So it's the way the guys talk to each other, as well as what the therapists point out that is really effective.
Yeah, I knew a guy that went to Alcoholics Anonymous? AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, so they're big on...
Why are you looking at me when you say it?
I just thought, trade unions, something about help. No, he said, they use that. He said, because it's not just that person knows what you're going through. He said it changes the dynamic when you know that they know what you've got. So because that, not know that they've been there, there's no point me saying this, and this to somebody, because that he's already done those sort of things. So all those little tricks, it softens everything out. Not just that he can help, but he knows the position you're in. So don't give him any of that waffle.
No. And equally in the prison I'm in at the moment, the women's prison, we're doing a whole project on self-harm and helping like the officers and all the workers, chaplains, education workers, psychologists, nurses understand why people are self-harming. And what we have is somebody who's got lived experience of being in a hospital of self-harming, and she's doing the training alongside us. And even a woman who was in the prison has come back. She's released.
Yeah.
And she's sitting down with people, you know, who maybe had to restrain her or whatever, something that was very awful at the time for them and for her, and say, this was my experience. And that has an impact. The lived experience of people has an impact that psychologists just don't.
The violence within the relationship things with women specifically, it was quite interesting. You was talking about that weird position with some people's mindsets of like, I know you're going to leave, so I'm going to cause problems to see if you leave. So there's a constant insecurity, which you sort of can't fix that by trying to push the person away. And the other person, you said, something almost becomes a carer, especially if there's a child involved. And I thought that was fascinating, because I knew people like that just constantly cause problems for a relationship that doesn't have problems apart from that, because you're assuming they're going to go away. So I can't remember the phrase used, but it was something about, it's easier to know that you're going to go than keep worrying about when you're going to go. And I thought, oh, that's fascinating.
I think you're talking about the chapter where it's the woman who's like the coercive controller and what I've called the intimate partner terrorist. So she's almost setting it up so that she has control over the other person.
That was it, yeah. But it was the fact of that it's going to happen, so it's worse to not know when it's going to happen. So I'm just going to try and make you leave, but not realise that I need you. I thought, oh God, yeah, I know some people like that. Did you ever? I was saying this to somebody a couple of weeks ago. The situation with Will Smith and Jada Smith, that whole relationship dynamic. Because I said to somebody, don't worry, I'm not going to say anything legal. But
looking nervous.
We're just getting a bit of celeb news here, aren't we?
No, because I said that is a perfect example of when the physicality is not in abuse, because that's pure mental. I mean, I don't know if you followed it, but yeah, she obviously cheated on him with his son's friend.
I think with most people she comes into contact with.
Yes, her son's
right now.
Friend who was going through his own issues in the house, but then she went on TV with Will and sort of blamed him, using the statement like, well, my husband should know my needs. And Will Smith, being Will Smith, is laughing and it's not serious while she's humiliating him.
While he's twitching slightly.
Yeah, and he's going, haha, this and that, and she's just stony faced. Well, you should know where I am. And she went on to another show. It's just some women on the show.
Why say that in public? I don't understand.
Humiliating, but without no conscience.
But maybe that's his thing. I don't know. Maybe they went back and had the greatest sex they've ever had. I don't know.
Well, you should listen to his audiobook. It's quite good, actually, because he talks about his relationships with his girlfriends and how he was always the nice one, and then he would be overly sensitive to things, like everything was a huge deal, and why aren't things? But anyway, but then when you go to see the Oscars now, and you really have to watch the fact that on one side there wasn't a problem, she wasn't being abused or anything like that, there was no threat, and you have the Oscars and you're on TV and you're around your peers and you're going to win an award and you're at the height of your game and your whole career, and on the other side you just had a look from your wife and he thought, what do I do here? The way I feel, that's the worst threat here, the look. So, and that's why I say about the non-violent emotional abuse, because it'll be one thing if the man with the woman, I said, but that's what that looks like the other way around. The fact he had all that on one side, on the Oscars, and you're going to go and attack somebody, a comic, another black man on the Oscars on your big night, and all it took.
His wife rolled her eyes.
Yeah, that's a mentally abusive relationship. So forget even the early bit where she's on TV saying, my husband should know. Not, I feel terrible for what I've done, but he should know what I want. And the women are going, I thought, she's a lunatic. But that is a perfect example of an abusive relationship where the violence isn't involved, because it's all mental. And if you listen to his audio, his biography and his audiobook, it is because he's quite psychological through his whole life. he's almost at the naive stage still. It's very clunky because I used to do the personal development, and I know what stage he's at because like everything has to go through a stage, and they all start off with rigid, I control, and I'm going to do this, and I get up exactly at that moment, and I do that exactly at that, and it feels like control. But when you've gone through that, you can look back and go, oh, it's still, you're at that naive stage of everything has to be clunky and into place, and I get up and I run. And after that, I go to there and I'm in control of myself. You go, that's the child stage because you're not in control, really. It's controlling you. But yeah, all through his life, he goes through the stage. And it's all to do with his dad was like one of these people he was scared of. But he learnt a lot from his dad. But there was always that fact of he was always missing something, that love. So every relationship he was in, that was it. So, I mean, when he got married to Jada Smith, it was quite sad because she was quite like a free spirit background hippie, and she didn't really believe in marriage. He said she was actually in tears on the day because she didn't want to get married. But he comes from a family that's Christian, and he wanted it. It was supposed to be a big deal. And he said, but then I was stuck between like, that's my wife and she's the one for me. But you notice when he spoke about other relationships, they're all also the one for him. And he gets cheated on early and he finds out. And it was a lot when he was like 19. And he's like, he couldn't believe it, and he ran out and he smashed something up.
But what's really interesting about what you're saying is you talk about stages of development, but the point is, I think all of us, no matter how psychologically aware or grown up or old we are, there's a moment where you just, it's quite a primitive feeling of the person I love and I need is looking at me with contempt. And it's back to that thing about shame as well. So rolling the eyes. I'm telling you, so much violence starts from a look. It's a look, and a guy.
What are you looking at? Yeah, I mean,
what are you looking at?
Yeah.
You saw that whole scene in Goodfellas, right?
Yeah.
Well, just I've
everywhere.
been on the end of it in many a bar or train.
What are you looking at? What do you think? And so in the therapy I was talking about, part of what we do is say, listen, nobody knows what's in someone else's mind.
Yeah.
You're convinced. I'm convinced that that you're looking at me and you're thinking she is talking shit. Now you might be thinking, I really didn't have enough for breakfast. Or does she have something? Is that a contact lens that's coming out? You could be thinking something totally different. But I'm convinced that what I think you think is true, and therefore I'm going to attack you because you're thinking again.
I can tell you something perfect about that.
Well, usually I'm thinking, did I send that email?
Exactly.
I'm not even like that. I'm not even looking at anything. I'm just my brain's ticking along, and I'm like, I'm staring at someone, and they're sort of going, "What's this person?"
I know. A doorman is on the way to work, and this is so most doormen. If you deal with violence all the time, you've probably acclimatized to it through your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do that job. That's how you end up there. Some people do it from nice backgrounds and they just fall off because they can't handle it. So it's that constant thing, and you've mentioned it, and it's quite universal where you've grown up. You're always on threat level red. Yeah. Because you don't, but it's just normal. And it's sort of the thing that's kept you alive. So in a weird way, you did need it. Otherwise you wouldn't have got to where you've got to. You've had to be hypervigilant, and you've been around violent things that go from nothing to something quick. And if you weren't that hypervigilant in a normal society, you wouldn't have survived anyway. When you go to a new society, it then works against you. In fact, Will Smith even talks about this.
Oh, really?
Not the violence bit. Yeah, it just pops
I'll
back.
listen to his
But this
audio.
was the good bit. He said he had to tell himself when he got to a certain stage, the armor that got him to that stage has to come off to get through that door to get to the next stage, knowing that, no, I did need that armor. It's not a bad thing. That's what protected me till I got to there. But now I need to go through there, and the armor has to come off. Not saying you would be ashamed of the arm. It literally got you safe to that place. But those things now have to come off, and now you have to move on to the next bit. But anyway, so this doorman I knew, so I was just going on a tangent about doorman. There's nothing about him, but he was on his way to work, and this is what he said. And it was just psychological. He just mentioned, he said, oh, look, something happened, and I got the wrong end. Somebody cut him up, the whole thing. And he said, he nearly hit me. It wasn't a small thing. He pulled in, and I was hitting my horn, you this and that, because it's like you're attacking me, which is insecurity, really. Just because you're under threat. If it was a kid, you wouldn't, but you see it as a threat. Anyway, but the guy's not stopping. Out the window, he pulled up, he got out the car and ran to the guy, and he went, my wife's in hospital. I've got to get, and he said, and he said it just fell away.
Yeah.
I thought you were sort of giving me the finger because of my background and what I'd brought to it.
Yeah.
And the guy had no intention of you or whatsoever. He was trying to get somewhere. But the way you view things, that was a perfect thing.
It's a great example.
He said, I felt it drop away. Like,
You're like, this has nothing to do with me.
He doesn't care about
me. I'm a bit player.
He doesn't even know.
You know
he went,
yeah.
I'm trying to get to the hospital.
You don't even register.
Yeah.
You know.
But that I just remember that. And there's a few things like that happen in life. And I think, oh God, you don't know why that it's not you.
Yeah.
But that was always became, I remember thinking of that as a weakness when you'd get angry at something. As I said about a child, if it was a child that said that, even though it's the same thing, would you rear up? No. That means
sadly, some of the people I work with would, because they see the kids as being huge and big and threatening.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They get very distorted. I mean, I worked in a child and family clinic for a few years. That was actually my worst experience because we worked with the parents to try and help them understand what was going on in their kids' mind. But for some of them, they just were like, that kid is just taking the piss, trying to wind me up. I'm going to show them. And you think, how can this big, strong person... But anyway, we got some good results, but there were others where the parents felt shamed if their children cried, if they were headbanging. A mum thought he was just, doing something bad to her. So it's quite difficult. But yeah, one hopes that big, strong people don't want to attack children.
Yeah. But
you discuss this in the book, and it's this, it's how you deal with, sort of not separating, but how you deal with someone's actions and the person themselves. And I'm sure that can be very, very difficult, especially with some of the forensic work you're dealing with and the nature of some of the offences. I mean, has there been a time where you've felt you couldn't effectively treat someone, where someone had done something so reprehensible, so awful, beyond the pale?
I mean, I think
that coloured your view.
Oh, you mean her personality? She thought, I can't.
Well, just their actions. Someone who's done something so awful.
That what you like? She can't control the emotions.
Well, that means possibly that they're. I suppose, are some people irredeemable? I don't think necessarily. Well, or are they? I don't know.
I've never not. I mean, there've been people whose offences I just are horrific. Racial offences against vulnerable people, torturing people with disabilities or children or killing children. I mean, those are hard, and you read about them and you think this is going to take some getting through. But then when you meet the person, if they're receptive to the work, if they have any, if you can see the real wish to understand and change what they've done, then, or they're very, very unwell mentally, then you can see, okay. But I mean, I have to say, I always care about the people I work with. There may be some people who get to a certain point where they're just not going to give up their violence or their racial attacks, for example. And then you think, okay, we've got as far as we can go. And so we have to end the work. But I have to say that's pretty rare. I mean, most people are so deprived, I think, of good relationships or of people who will listen to them and try and understand them and not judge them, that they really, particularly in secure units and prisons where, they're being kept against their will sometimes, or there's an element of punishment when there are people, and it isn't just psychotherapists or psychologists, it can be teachers. Teachers are amazing. It can be the gym staff. It can be chaplaincy. It can be an officers who sit down and listen but they tend, I believe that relationships are the key to connections, and relationships will help people. But are people irredeemable? I think practically
some.
I mean, there are some people who are so, if you like, addicted to their behavior, like an alcoholic might be. But some cases of people who are so, say, there are a couple of people I've worked with who are sexually offending against children, and you just think, this is why you get up in the morning.
Oh, right, yeah.
And though you're telling me you really want to change, I can see that you're still finding vulnerable women with children in the community, and you're still, whether you're presenting yourself as a man of the church or a otherwise very good citizen. Interestingly, lots of abuse gets covered up if people are respectable members of society. I'm sure we know that from the church and teachers who've strayed in this way, or even the police. So there are some moments where you just feel a bit heart sink and you think, I'm just almost ticking a box that's going to make you look like you've changed, when actually I believe there's a part of you that's just so wedded to this. But most of the time, that isn't the case. But in a very small minority, I'd be naive if I thought everyone really, some people think, oh, here's the psychologist, let me tell her the story she wants to hear.
So if people are willing to engage, at the very least, then you believe that there is a good chance that you might be able to help them in some way.
Yeah, I think there's hope. And some of the other things about living what they call a pro-social life. So there are things about when you get out of a psychiatric hospital or clinic or prison, what's going to help you stay, as it were, on the straight and narrow. It could be psychological checking in or continued work, but also things like having a job. We know that people with personality disorder, borderline or emotionally unstable personality disorder, are much less likely to relapse if they have a good structure in their day. So go back to education. And that's why, someone like Timpson, who's giving places that are giving jobs to ex-offenders and not, you were saying you had a difficult time. So, for people who have really suffered and been outcast by society, to have a place that they're proud of and feel valued and can structure their day is just hugely important. Lots of people come into prison can't read or write. So learning to read or write, detoxifying. So it isn't just about psychological therapy. It's about having a whole way of seeing yourself and the world that gives you hope and meaning and structure and purpose. And that's why, it's not about, prisons are these terrible places. Actually, for some people, sadly, indictment of society, prison's the only place that will give them a roof over their heads or a chance to detoxify or escape from their violent, partners or pimps. So it's part of why I love the work I do, is because it gives me access to, I understand things in our government, in our society that I don't think if I just sat in a nice room seeing, middle-class professionals talking about really deep problems, I don't think I understand as much or about what the impact of social forces is on mental health.
Yeah, I've the
long speech. Really sorry, I don't know what happened.
That's what you're here for, to talk.
It's great, yeah. It's great.
I remember what you was just talking about. I was really angry as a young kid or young adult. And there was a moment
and this morning.
Yeah. Well, since Trump got in, I thought I've been more on edge since he... I remember, so I was just angry. Didn't really have any reference points, just angry, early 20s. And I remember getting my first job. So I lived on the streets for a while, lived in the car, cash in hand, bar work, here or there, not a job. I was always angry. It wasn't actually anything to do with my childhood, really. It was, but I was just annoyed by everybody. And I couldn't figure out why, because I didn't have any reference points. And then I got a job for, do you remember Comet, the show home furniture Comet?
Yeah,
it was like
machines.
Yeah, ages ago.
Fridges.
Anyway, so I had a job with them. It was a nothing job. I had to wear a shirt and a tie. The second day back, second week, when I got the wage check and it came through, I felt something and I didn't know what it was. And I think it was over like a week period afterwards. I'd never had sort of pride at all. Wow. But I felt the feeling when I opened the check and I thought, it's the money. I thought, no, now I've got to get up to what, and now I'm in it. But I didn't know what in it meant, but it just made me less angry. And that stayed with me for years, because I remember the feeling dropping on me of, I was angry because I was outside of everything. Plus I couldn't read. And so that was, I think, what...
Yeah, you mentioned dyslexia.
Looking back now, I think it was the shame. That's why I'm angry at you, because I can't read and it's embarrassing. So it's a shame. And you're not shamed and I am. So I hate you. And I don't have a job. And I see you going to work, so I hate you lot. And that job, having that, which was nothing, it wasn't about the job. I just remember having... Suddenly there was some sort of structure, which meant I was in the world. And I remember the anger fell off. And I didn't know what I was angry. I was just angry at people. And the more happy they were, the more angry I was. So I always think about that now with when I see, whether it's like racist or the right and whatever, you think nobody happy's doing that. And the more happy those people are, the more it's digging into you. Because the more, like if you see an Asian family and they've got the news agent on the corner and they've got a nice car and you don't see the hours they've worked and what they've put in. It's just them jibing at you, and you've done nothing. It's not like but you've done things wrong, and that's what you messed over that person. You told that boss to stick it up his arse, and you didn't want that job because it's too much hard work. And now you're where you are, and you're looking at them, and the nicer they are, the more it jibes at you. But I still think, like in America, especially when people say woke, I think they're actually annoyed at people that are kind and because it's jibing at it's jibing at whatever you think you are, making the happy they are, the worse it is on. What was he's
mocking. I suppose it is literally just a mocking and making it a pejorative term. It's sort of empathy and compassion.
It was. Do you remember we said this before? So James O'Brien, the LBC radio presenter, and his book. Do you remember the bit I said when he's speaking to the guy about, was it Trump? And he's saying Trump this and Boris Johnson that, and he's going, but why? Because that doesn't make sense what you're saying. Because I've told you this. Yeah, but he's this. And you go, yeah, but so that doesn't make sense. Okay, what about this? Why do you like him? Well, because he'll do this. Yeah, but he's that, and that. He said, so why do you still like him? And what did he say? He said, and then I realised the guy dropped it. And he went, after all the excuses about I like him because of this, and it's all, and he went, because I know he annoys people like you. And he went, there, we've got to the truth now. I can't attack my boss. I can't attack them. But you sitting there being nice and happy, and I want to attack you, but I can't. But he will on my behalf. But that thing, he said, I know he attacks people like that. And that's what it's all about. It's not about you like that person because of this and that. You're just angry, and that person will go and smash things up because you can't. And bringing other people down makes you feel better about yourself. Because I think that's what a lot the violence thing is. It's you feel bad about yourself, and you've got chaos in your head, and you want the world to be feeling what you're feeling.
You want to get rid of it, and you also don't want to own it. So you project it onto the Jews, the blacks,
the racists. Look at these taking the jobs. Not that what you haven't done in your life. Let's focus on they've got, as if they've taken something, rather than what did you do to end up there.
It's and again, that's the kind of shame. Yeah. But you've made me remember two things. So one of the things that made me want to go into this work was when I was in college in America, just for a year before I came here. It was Reagan's America, and he was. I didn't approve of him, but he had this amazing scheme where people who were under the poverty line, which I was, could get a salary that the government would pay for, which would help their college tuition fees. So I worked in a psychiatric hospital teaching people literacy. And then I worked with these huge guys, like really muscular, big guys who happened to have committed crimes while they were unwell. And they couldn't read or write. And that was such a hugely shaming experience. And then they got their high school equivalency diploma. So that was really moving, seeing the kind of shame about not being able to read and then not being able to take part in society. Yeah. But the other thing he made me think about was that when I first worked with a guy who said he'd left people for dead from one of these football firms, I was pretty naive, and I said, oh, yeah, it must be like so hard when your team doesn't win, and then you feel really frustrated, and you're so identified with the team. He was like, Anna, this has nothing to do with the football.
Basically.
This is just a chance to get together and beat the shit out of a group of people. And I thought, okay. Yeah. It's just, remember that. It's not, oh, poor you, your team let you down. So really interesting. So the patients are always teaching me.
Yeah, of course, yeah. The guy I said that was the AA fella. He used to be into football violence, and I knew him afterwards. We was doing security together, and we was talking about the football violence and all that. And he said they hide behind patriotism. He said, look, when they go overseas, it's England versus Germany, and it's all England flags, and they're smashing it up. But then they come back here, and now they're fighting other English people because now they're with that football team and they're not. He said, but take the football away, you can guarantee they've had a fight down the pub because somebody's looked at somebody and they're not from their pub and that's their pub. He said, go even lower than that, they've probably got a problem with their neighbour It's just somebody. He said, so the patriotism thing is nothing. It doesn't hold out anywhere. It's just anger that hidden behind football or racism or patriotism. He said it's all just this one emotion that all these other things present themselves that they can use as weapons rather than admit the problems of themselves.
But with that person, you see, then we finally got dug a bit deeper, and he'd been pretty much abandoned by his own mother and had terrible trauma in his family where one parent had killed another parent. But his own experience was of being rejected and left. And so he's constantly trying to show what a hard man he was. And he was somebody who was quite, taught me a lot, very challenging, but getting to the vulnerability where they say, actually, it's a bit of me I hate. Not the people I'm leaving for dead.
We had someone at work, and he was, so I worked for trade union, doing some casework and stuff, for employment issues. And they had this guy, a person, I'm not going to try to go into details, but yes, and they called up and they would get into an argument a screaming argument with every single person they talked to. And I'd check the notes of the case file. It's every single person. Like they went through about 6, 7 people, 8 people. Everyone who came into contact with them basically had to terminate the call because they were just. This guy was just. He'd just start pick up the phone. And he'd just start screaming. You'd be like, dude, what? Like, excuse me, who is this? Yeah. I knew who it was because after you get the name, you get the number down. You're like, but it's funny because I always felt sorry for him because I just thought this guy's life must be a nightmare because every interaction he has is probably nearly ending up in a physical altercation. He goes and buys a pack of cigarettes and he's getting into an argument with the guy in the shop over nothing. Everything he does is just fraud. And I just thought it must be a nightmare. And he would just call up and start screaming. And because I don't really care. Sometimes, like, the nice thing is I can just leave my body and be detached. Now I'm just like, oh, yeah. I'm just like, okay, yeah, cool.
Just listen.
I'm like, no, that's fine. Oh, really? Oh, dear, that's terrible. He's just he's just literally losing.
I wonder if that's almost
biting on, but like
that's a good way of handling it. It's just to agree with everything, and leave
not
it.
Agree, but I'm just like, okay, I'm just calm and like think. Yeah. I don't engage with it, and after a bit, he sort of went, and just kind of.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's a great example, isn't it? Of if you just don't engage with the retaliate.
Yeah, right. Because they almost need the friction to carry on. Like it's like the fire triangle. If you just take out one of the aggressions, then okay, is that it? Yeah.
But I just like people trying to affect my emotional state. Right. So if someone comes up to me and starts to pick a fight, get angry or whatever, and get in my face, I'm just like. I won't accept that anger from them. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I just think, no, because I don't want that. And I don't want them to negatively affect me. Same thing with someone who's depressed, anything in negative things, I'll just try and go, no thanks. Try to remain calm.
I stopped at one of the, because I wanted to find out what happened. I didn't want to listen the whole way through. The lady who had taken the doctor hostage with the knife, could you just say that story if anybody doesn't know, like, what happened?
This was a woman who is a bit like the person that you've just described because she was so fraught and fractious and angry and paranoid, really suspicious of the world, and actually did kind of hate herself and think she was not worthy of love or care. But the way she defended against those feelings is in what might be seen as a much more typically male kind of way, in that she was always really aggressive. And this is what we know, actually, whether it's men or women, at the point, if you've got that insecure sense of people aren't going to be around for you, you're going to get abandoned, you've been going to get rejected, then at the point where someone wants to leave you, or there's an ending, or even a break, even a holiday, it's really, really threatening. So because she'd been so kind of challenging and quite needy underneath it, like probably, I would say this guy who calls up all the time wants contact somewhere. Yeah. So she really was demanding and quite aggressive until the point where the doctor said, look, I'm not going to be able to work with you anymore. And then she spiraled out of control, and a bit like any coercive control, at the point where someone wants to leave you, that's the highest risk. So she took the doctor hostage and was
It's a GP level. Yeah.
the GP, and really, really frightened her and had a weapon. And then the most chilling bit is, I guess she was laughing as she talked about how frightened that doctor was.
Oh.
So this was a person where I did occasionally feel quite frightened, especially she wore, as I described, she wore dark glasses, so you couldn't see her eyes.
Yeah.
And it was a real breakthrough when she took off her glasses. So that was like vulnerability. I can't see her eyes, but she can see me. And she also would terrorize kind of staff in where I saw her. She'd be very angry, and why are you searching me, and why do I have to wait, and very contemptuous about other people. But underneath it, there was quite a terrified person, and she kept tight control. She tracked people. Her husband, she was convinced, was unfaithful. Probably I wasn't her neighbor, but I can imagine that there would be lots of disputes. And I know she told me about things that were really, really difficult, where she interpreted everything very suspiciously. But thank goodness she engaged with me. I had to withstand numerous humiliations, but a bit like you, it's like, okay, that's what I'm for.
Yeah.
I'm not going to retaliate. And then I made sure that she would see a really good colleague when I left, because I was just thinking, how am I going to tell her I'm having something?
Yeah.
But when you get to know her experience of being alone and scared, and I guess the most difficult thing for me is she started to watch Nazi movies and told me about it when I was on a break.
Right.
And I was thinking, what does she know about me? Is she trying to find my most raw nerve and press it? Probably.
Yeah, maybe. And not even know she's doing it.
Possibly
natural.
do it on purpose.
Oh, okay.
Do it on purpose.
Well, that's what I was thinking about the glasses. Do you think she was hiding it? Was that a power play on her behalf? Was she shameful, or was she...
I think both.
Both, right.
I think, although I have to say, another person I worked with who I'm assessed in prison, he wore these dark glasses, and he was a very violent character. I then saw him for years as an outpatient, and he always wore dark glasses. And I thought, oh, you want to be intimidating, you want to be a hard man. The guy had an undiagnosed brain tumor, and I know it was awful. And so we made all these interpretations, but in the case of the woman, no, it was definitely a defensive, you can't see me.
Right,
and I've worked with other people who do that, who swagger around and put on the dark glasses. And particularly like when you work with young lads, you see a lot of that really macho bravado, and underneath they're just little kids.
That's yes, and I do feel that sometimes. I'm just walking, just being on the tube. There was some bloke strutting around, and bless him, I didn't see, young, confident, handsome man with all the hair and the stuff and the bits and the nice clothes. I thought I saw a little child. He had to put on. He wore so much stuff, and he had a bit, and he had really chiseled facial hair, and and I just thought, you must have spent hours in the mirror doing that, and like with your eyebrows and stuff, like genuinely. And I don't see like someone. I saw someone who was not very confident and had to spend hours doing that.
Do you remember who's the young guy? Oh, the kickbox everyone goes on about. He's affecting all the kids. He's the go-to person.
Oh, Andrew Tate.
Yeah. So I didn't know. I'm a bit out of the loop with everything, but I kept hearing the name pop up. And I was just like, he sounds like a pillar. But the name it became like normalised name that kept popping up. And I thought, and I Googled the name, and an interview popped up on, like, you got the descriptions, and then there's some YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And one of them.
Top articles or whatever.
Yeah. And one of them is him sat there with his top off, sunglasses on, being interviewed.
Smoking a cigar?
No, let me get. I was going to get that.
Slightly Freudian.
And I looked. I thought, oh, he's just a child. He's still trying to show off.
Just
and now,
slowly
there was a photograph of him with a cigar. I thought, he's trying to be a man. I just thought, oh, it's just a little boy. So it reminded me of when I was at the gym. I got kicked out of this gym. And they didn't let me back in. And I was training. I think I might have mentioned this before. And there was a guy on the phone next to me, quite animated. It wasn't a big gym. It was quite small. It wasn't that. It was really out of place. Carrying on. This tall guy right next to me, and I try to talk myself out of things. I think just let it go. But just the background, I can feel it coming. And I start to black out, and I can't. It's like a battle happens where I'm telling myself, everything I need to hear. It's not your battle. My friend.
You just come to about an hour
Everything
later in a
people have
park.
taught me that I'm telling myself, yeah, right, no, that makes sense. And eventually I think, right, it's so unjust what's going on here that I start to black out. I've got to say something. And then even then, I still hold it in and I still say something which is as least as possible, but I have to say something. And I said, now I've forgotten what it was. But anyway, and I said to him, look, can you just knock it on the head a bit? Because it's gone like 5 minutes. I've given you every out, like let you burn it out. Because that was it. He answered the second phone call right next to me and he's talking loud. I think, no, that's too much. And I said something, and he was saying, and I said, "Why do you give a shit? Like everyone has to hear you." I said, "Can't." And he went, "I don't give a shit." I said, "And I know." And there was a woman cycling in front. I said, "No." She doesn't give a shit about other people. You're the only one who does care what everybody else is thinking. But the way he said it in his head, like, I don't care. I said, no, you're literally doing this. I said, she doesn't care. He doesn't care about anybody else. You do care. That's why you're at. You wouldn't be doing that if you was on your own. And he kicked it, but then it turns out he worked there.
Oh, no.
So next time I came in.
So, another gym you're not invited to.
There was two. No, because it makes me sound bad, but there was in that same town.
It makes me sound bad, but yes, it is another gym I can.
No, because it was the people in that town.
It's not just the gym. It's
I know how it
in
sounds.
that town.
No, but you've got to be nice. My thing is just be nice, but some people just don't understand the rules.
But sometimes if you do the kind of, I'm really, really sorry. I know you're like super stressed, but I've got such a bad headache.
Yeah, I haven't got to that point yet.
You can't do the kind of, so, and I see a lot like your technique about just letting it go. So I see people when they get turned away, being turned away is a really big thing in prisons.
Yeah.
You miss your appointment. The officer says you can't go. There's too many people in chapel, whatever. And the women get really, really irate. And you can see people going, no, that's enough, and standing. And that's really counteractive. I know you have to set a boundary, but if you're just like, okay, let's go somewhere quiet and talk, you can diffuse. You can do that thing you're doing of just diffusing the aggression rather than escalating.
I think what
I watched just recently.
Hang on, let me defend myself. Because it's quick.
No, never.
No. I think my problem was, looking back, that I didn't say something a bit softer earlier. I let it go. So by the time I say anything, I'm just waiting for him to say something wrong so I can just go, right, you son of a bitch. So go on.
But noise is a big trigger. Other people's noise and smoke and all that is a big trigger for a lot of...
Go on, what was you going to say?
I forgot what I was going to say. There we go.
I'm so sorry.
That brief...
Oh, no.
It was there.
Diffusing
it was
aggression.
There, it's gone.
Oh, okay. That was a bit passive-aggressive there. Maybe you did... I do remember what it was. I'm not going to make you feel bad.
Out again.
Yeah.
And also, there is such a thing as righteous anger, isn't there? Like, we wouldn't have had the civil rights movements. We wouldn't have... peaceful protests against the wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So
it's just a very small somebody on their phone too loudly. So what happened with that woman? Do you know? Like, how far down the line do you know what goes on?
I know that she engaged really, really well with my colleague,
and
that she got care through. She got you can see that wish for contact and understanding and reassurance that people aren't going to leave her. Obviously, she was showing in her behavior through screaming, yelling, fighting, making suicide threats, trying to control every member of her family. So through the therapy, she got more insight and understanding and was able to talk about feeling scared much more. But also, as somebody in her family became very unwell, the baby who she was a grandmother to, and she was able to show that real love and vulnerability and actually change some of her. She became much less aggressive and violent and kind of was almost shocked into saying, wow, I love and can be loved. And that was really amazing.
When I was did security at clubs, I realised it's just the natural law when they're 18, 19 and they come to work as a doorman. You cannot tell them things they can't hear. It's a bit like somebody says to a young person, be yourself. Say, tell them anything else. Do not say that because you can't absorb it. So it's just wasted. Even though it makes sense to you and you know it's right, they can't hear that at that age, so it's wasted. And I would see the young guys and it didn't matter what you said. If there's a bit of aggression, they're going to meet you with aggression because that's the age they're at. Nothing, you would try to rationalise, there's no point getting angry and all. Didn't matter because they can't hear it. But what I realised was if what they've got is like some of the people that were in gangs as well, they've actually got high protective instincts. And when I'd give them something to be responsible for,
Absolutely.
it would calm down. And I don't know the psychology behind that, but I just remember, they're always on protecting. I thought, from my background, I was thinking maybe if you've seen injustices and you were too young to do anything, and that sense of shame, so when you see injustices elsewhere, you want to protect things and go over the top.
Absolutely.
And so I would put them in charge of things that weren't needed to be. Will you just keep an eye on him for me?
That's
and then
great.
Suddenly they'd calm them down.
But you're like valuing them, you're showing them respect. You're not just saying, oh yeah, you were wronging.
Yeah, I knew a guy. It scared me how quickly something changed. There was this kid that I was working with. I always wonder if I should say this, but it's not tricking somebody. But he was. I couldn't figure out what to say to him to get him to calm down when there was fights going on, knowing that you can't tell them. I was just trying to figure out ways around it. And I remember him talking to somebody, and the fight sort of calmed down. And I thought, and I joked, and I said to the other guys, I'm going to call him the negotiator. I'm going to tell him what he is, even though he's aggressive. And I said I came in from work, and I said to the guy, when you come next week, when you say hello, say, oh, the negotiator. And I'll say, oh yeah, I said about what you did in there. And that night he's changed. He suddenly, and I had to take a bit of a risk, because when there was something going on, I'd say, oh, we'll send the negotiator in, and he'd go and he's playing the role. But I realised he had nothing. It was almost like you have nothing to grab onto. So you grab onto, if somebody says here that you're the negotiator, they don't think, oh, you're playing games with me, even though I'm overly aggressive. He then became the talker, and it changed that night. And I was like, oh, Jesus. Like now he's talking on purpose. And sometimes you see him look over at me to see if I'm looking that he's, but it changed that night. And I was like, oh God, it's like, that's how simple it is, like simple things like that. And I knew, and I have mentioned this before, because when I would work, I moved into a different world, but I was still having to work in bad places, bad jobs, the sort of jobs that just catch everybody at the bottom. And there was a guy who everyone hated. He was about 60, quite weaselly looking. He looked dodgy from a distance. Yeah. He had the Sun newspaper. It was that sort of fella. Somebody said, oh, he's a little bit racist as well. It was, I don't want to say what the company was, but it was moving furniture around. Anyway, but whenever I was in those situations, I thought, I'm going to test myself every day. The new test. I have to tell myself, while I'm still doing these jobs, I have to tell myself why I have to give myself something to do. And this guy, I thought, oh God, he's not a nice bloke. And I had to work with him the whole day, me and him in a van. And he immediately was almost sticking two fingers up at me. I thought, and so he said, oh, I'm kind of a fag. I know you're not allowed to, but I don't give a shit. And he sort of threw his coat button. I thought, okay, right, he's trying to look on Sun newspaper rolled up in the thing. I thought, sod you, mate. I'm going to get you some. I'm going to figure it out somehow. The first day, he's not talking, one monosyllabic answers. I don't know why, just this is the way he's just being off-put. He liked the fact that nobody liked him. Just weird stuff.
Like a comfort in...
Yeah, and when I don't know. I didn't say anything about smoking. He went, I don't know, you're not supposed to smoke. I don't give a shit. All this. Anyway. And I got through the day, and I knew he's a lazy sod. And I'm quite energetic anyway. And I said... all right, how much we got? It's heavy stuff. We had to lift like sofas up. I went, I'll take the bottom end. Just you do the push, and I like get me workout in. And he went, all right, yeah. So I just thought, right, I'm going to kill him with just doing everything. I went to the shop, and I knew he's not around people that do anything. I went, oh, it's buy one get one free. I said, oh, I got you one. I said, it's not really, but I had to pay an extra 10p to get the two, so you can have that. And he went, and anyway, the next morning I had to work with him again. And I went, I'll pop him to the coffee thing, and I knew he got coffee, and he didn't have one. I noticed it. So I went, I'll pop in, I just want to get a drink. I said, oh, do you want to get a coffee for her? And I went, yeah, go on and whatever. And I brought the coffee out and I give it to him, didn't ask for the money. Anyway, third day, now he started talking.
Yeah, there you go.
And I was, whenever we were stuck in traffic, I would start asking him questions, because I was always fast. To this day, I still annoy people with questions.
Oh, it's great.
And I said, so what this? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you do that? Naturally, but I just like doing it. Nothing, just still answers. And he said, oh yeah, I didn't do fitness, but I did a bit of dance. And I thought,
there you go.
oh right, what is it? And I thought, oh, don't let it be boring. And it was like jive bopping or something.
Oh, wow.
And I naturally went, oh, is that thing from like da-da-da? And he went, and I said, hang on, is that the one that's that? He went, no, that's so-and-so. This is, and I said, well, how does that start? He went, well, it started then with the thing. I said, but who did you do it with?
That was his topic then. You found
as he said dance, I thought,
Yeah.
right, it's 50-50 here. He could say break dancing. And he said the weird one. And I went, oh, is that the one with it? He went, no, that's so-and-so. This is done. How did you get involved in that? When I was 20. Well, your missus, yeah, she won this thing. And did you win anything? Blah, blah, blah. And anyway, and it carried on. The next day, third day, I came in and he said, oh, so-and-so. He said, what have you done to him? He said he wanted to work with you. And I was saying that, he came in, he went, here, me and you were together today. Anyway, and I thought, I broke it. All he wanted was someone to talk to, and he was against the talk. That's a weird thing as well, to not...
Well, if you grow up and everyone tells you, you're the rotten apple, or as people used to say before, it was considered racist, the black sheep, which most of my patients have said, you're just like, okay, everyone's going to hate me, so I'll be hateable. Like, I can't trust anyone.
That's with
and
the
you
cigarette
broke
thing.
through it.
But
I suppose they take that role on, don't they?
Because it wasn't just somebody that was quiet that I sort of got into them.
No.
He was working against me as if like, I don't give a shit.
But that's like the woman I worked with, and I love it because it's such a challenge. It's like, I'm gonna break you. I'm gonna get.
I worked
through.
as a psychologist for a magazine I was putting together.
Oh, really?
And I was asking him stuff, and he said, because I said, and I was a bit dumb at the time, I didn't really understand anything. And I was saying, but what if they don't want help? All that sort of stuff. And he said, no, unless they're like psychologically just completely broken. He said, he was told about the Michelangelo. He said, when somebody was asked about what do you start thinking about when you're carving somebody up, and he said, there's somebody inside the carving, and I just pull the pieces off. But he said, I know what they look like, and I know what they do, and I know how they feel, and I'm going to get them out. And he said, I remembered that. He said, when there was people that I didn't like, he said, that's not the person I'm dealing with. He said, there's somebody locked inside, and I can't leave them in there, and I have to deal with this bit to get through to them. And I thought, just the visuals of somebody being locked in there, and I just have to get past this bit. Sort of almost like a psychological trick yourself to go, I'm not dealing with that person there. They're in there somewhere.
Or you can do that and think about what the little kid would look like.
Oh, the kid,
What kind of baby they were.
Yeah.
But I love that. And it also, I have to say, sometimes it's dancing is wonderful. Sometimes it's dogs. So we have dogs as pets as therapy, and the dogs come in, and you see the hardest, most, non-communicative women just suddenly like, oh, they're down on the ground.
Yeah.
So it's exactly that. It's, and finding that thing that gets the person alive that they loved, like for dance, and God knows what else had happened to him.
It's as simple as everyone just wants some sort of rock. It is like swimming, and you got nothing, so you just grab onto anything. And if you've never had a rock and then something comes along, you just grab onto that. And it's like the animal. Like I know in America they do a lot with bringing cats into there. And you think if somebody's got nothing and suddenly they've got something, that clears a lot up. And
it's also attachment, isn't it? It's also, I believe every single person in the world comes into the world wanting love and care and attachment, but things happen that make you distrust, that make the people who are most perhaps damaged or damaging not trust anyone or anything. And what you did is you just got through. You're like, no, I'm going to keep going until and he would have loved that you, even though he's saying, oh yeah, I'm trying to piss you off. Actually, there's some part of him that was so pleased that you kept making contact.
Yeah, it was the dancing, because then he kept going on about it, and I kept on, and it was like, because I didn't know anything about it.
So you were interested, actually.
Yeah, I naturally went, oh, that thing.
Yeah.
But when he said dance, I thought, oh, please don't let it be something Anna done, because I've got nothing. I thought if it's break dance, what would I say? But he said something. I thought, oh, I know that. Isn't where the polka dot dress it? He went, no, that's the thing. And then I thought, I was asking. But then I suppose the reality that how I was coming across probably fed into the fact, oh, he does want to listen. He's not being patronising. But it was just the next day when, oh, you're with me. And I thought, oh, because the guy actually said, what do you eat? Nobody likes this bloke and he wants to work with you.
What happened? What did you say? Yeah.
I went, oh, yeah, mate. But one, because I knew I'd do all the work. I'd do all the heavy lifting. I bought him a coffee. I was interested in what he said. So it's sort of my will to like people broke your negativity. But I'd do that all the time too. I used to feel bad because I used to sort of like Pavlovian conditioning with people to say, oh, people are they're quite base. Everything's very, very simple. We're all sort of like kids. but we just add on bits. But everything's very basic: love and have enough happiness and smile enough and this and that. And anything that seems to go wrong is because one of those basic 4 or 5 things, something's wrong with one of them. I always say to people, look around the people you're around. Forget all the stuff you could talk about. I say, how many people make you laugh? How many times have you laughed this week? Because I used to say every day, and I think people don't laugh every day, not nowadays. I said, in a week, how many people have you laughed? That person you're around all the time, how many times has that person made you laugh? That's a barometer that I use for how many times have you laughed that week, just because you have to give yourself them things. Otherwise, it just gets mixed up. But if you give yourself lines in the sand, how many times did I laugh?
I make myself laugh all the time. Sometimes I think about myself and I just laugh and laugh.
I genuinely worried about the psychology of myself, because I've said this to you before, not as a joke either, when the masks came out and I could smile and laugh and not get in trouble. Because I only because I do it all the time, where I'd think of something and I'd laugh at myself and I think, right, that's not right to laugh at yourself. You shouldn't, there's got to be something wrong. And when the masks came off again, I was like, oh no, I've got to train myself to not laugh anymore.
Okay, I was doing weird stuff with my mouth loads when I was wearing masks. So I got to admit that I was sort of going, blah, blah, blah.
What?
Like sticking my tongue out and just going like, blah, 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 like sometimes.
No, I would just, people would do something silly
bored.
and I'd laugh and I'd feel bad about myself. But the mask, it was great, but I forgot. I took it off and then I thought, oh, I can't laugh because they can see me laughing. Anyway, there's something wrong with laughing at your own joke. You shouldn't find yourself funny.
No, my patients said a brilliant thing. I'm sure they don't mind my saying it. They said, I realized that the reason we have such a good time on our dates and we laugh so much is because I'm really funny. And they're not actually funny at all. I was like, you are really funny.
That's very funny. Yes.
When you get a new patient, is there any sort of structure that you know? Is there a timeline? Is there anything that?
Well, I'm really lucky because I love working, a bit like your guy that took 3 days before he could even start grunting. I like working with people for a long time, and actually in prisons and secure units, that's the one place where they know, because people are high risk, they know that therapy is going to take a long time.
Right.
So, but the first thing we do is just, if I'm doing an assessment, it's much more structured. So I do some work where I have to go and do court reports, and then I have to talk about the offense or the history or what they want, what they think could change. But when it's therapy, we can go slow, and because people don't want to
timeline. They don't say like you've got 8 months or something.
Unless the person is going to be released very soon. Generally, we have more time because of there's some people who I have maybe 6 months, but mainly it's longer. And it really does take years when people have these defenses, or they've met so many professionals and they've just all dumped them. So
especially when you first come in, it must be like, right, there's 3 or 4 weeks of nothing happening here. We just got to sit and talk and listen, and you play your game and all.
Or sometimes people just tell you their trauma story or tell you the rehearsed thing, but that's not necessarily the real stuff. And it's just like, I've learned. A colleague said, oh yes, this person has learned to entertain professionals for the past 25 years. It's like, that's another good way of seeing it. Yeah. So, but I think being, also, I guess I started out being much more, this is the boundary and you must know nothing about me. And actually the MBT model is about being quite authentic and being able to make jokes and being able to say you're sorry and being much more of a person. And that's great, particularly with people who, they need to know I'm a real person. I'm not just some kind of
computer program.
Basically. Yeah.
Well, I listened to a negotiator, an American guy, and he said, you can't lie. He said, I have to turn up and I say, look, I get it. Like he said most things, like most people take family members because they're easier. They're not going to do anything, but it's just easy. He said, but you have to make them, you just have to say, look, I get it. I don't know what you've been through, but I know things didn't want to end up here. Things have just spiraled out of control. He said, but you have to make them realize that I'm on your side. I'm not here to trick you. And he said, because they'll pick up on it. You have to say, look, I'm not here. Things have just got out of hand, and I'm here to help the situation as it is now. He said, but you can't, the guy was saying about what questions. He said, you've just got to understand they're in a bad situation. Somebody's in a bad situation, and just say, I'm here to help this situation the best we can, rather than trying to trick them or play games.
And not to judge. And particularly lots of teenagers, adolescents, you're going to judge me. You're going to judge me.
Yeah.
I'm not here to judge. I'm here to try and understand. I want to hear in your own words. Have to be totally straight. I've read all these reports about you. I understand why you're here from these, but I want to know from you.
Yeah.
And also, what you tell me can't be confidential if you're doing a court report or a psychological assessment. And so, don't tell me something. Please don't tell me that you've killed someone and name them. If the police don't know that yet, you don't quite say that. But anything you tell me, if someone's at risk, if you're at risk, I have to disclose that. So people, it's about not lying and being straight. But that's more for the kind of report bit. For the therapy, it is like, let's work together and try and figure out exactly, as you say, how you came to be here.
With all the things that you go through, you have to listen to, and the stories. Is there any official thing in your profession where you have automatic therapy at the end of the year, or is there anything you specifically have to, or is it just it's
really
there?
Interesting. For the psychotherapy training, I had to have my own psychotherapy.
Oh, right.
And for the one that was about working with offenders, it's once a week. But for the actual psychoanalytic psychotherapy training, it was 3 times a week.
Oh, right.
But to be a psychologist, you don't actually have to have your own therapy. It's not required, but it's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you don't know what's your stuff, what's their stuff.
Right, yeah. And how does that, what sort of therapy is that? Like, how does a session like that work? Is it just, so what have you heard and what have you listened to? Is it?
No, it's meant, certainly for the psychotherapy training, analytic psychotherapy training, I was on the couch. And I was talking about my dreams. And
Literally a couch?
Literally a couch. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
so
the real deal.
What? So it's actually a sort of therapy session rather than a supervision.
Supervision is very different. So supervision, you would say, if you're really struggling to make sense of why someone, quite interesting, I often say this, but some of my colleagues have listened so much to hearing about humans being hurt, but when it comes to animals being tortured, that's something really emotional they can't bear. So that's exactly where you'd go to a supervisor and you'd say, I'm really struggling to feel compassion for this patient. Or sometimes patients fall in love with you and get very fixated. That can be scary as well.
Right, yeah.
Or sometimes they might really hate you, and that's also something to talk about. So supervision would be about the work.
Yeah.
Psychotherapy would be, what is it about you that you keep.
And do you feel the weight on you, or is it you've become accustomed to it now, the weight of the stories and things, or is it something you always feel that you have to?
It's so
carry?
Interesting, and the people I was engaged with them, I think. So it can be really intense. It can be really, really intense, and some people's experiences just you find yourself. When I go on vacation, I probably spend a few days just trying to stop
before it starts
worrying about how the people are doing.
And where in your career, what's the next thing? Is there something more specific?
Well, there's
child. So you're now doing it with women.
Yeah, I love working in the prison. I love working privately, as I do as well, with people who haven't committed crimes that I know about. Anyway, I want to write more. I just love this work. I would like to go. So some of the pilot projects we're doing, helping train up officers, I would like to take that to other prisons. So it's just more, keeping going more. I would like to work also. It sounds strange, but I really miss the male offenders as well, because they were a whole different vibe. So I'd like to go back to doing some work with them.
Okay, right.
What was your first book?
The first book was called The Psychology of Female Violence, Crimes Against the Body. And then I've written a book about violent relationships.
Yeah.
So
could you say something about the violent relationship bit? Was it more women to men, or was that just anything? That
was all different types of violent relationships, but a lot about the men I worked with, the men who were so terrified of being abandoned that they got super controlling, the shame. Some women who were in that intimate partner violence too, but also some really toxic couples where they would turn their hatred against children and commit all acts of brutality. I guess that was emotionally very difficult.
Yeah.
But also there's a woman who's written about her experience where she was actually blinded, called Tina Nash. And it was Shane Jenkins, I believe. This is all in the public realm. And she had this horrific experience of a violent partner who left her for dead. And she could never see her children again. He was that jealous and possessive. And the most interesting thing was a really, really interesting book she wrote, very moving. But then she went on to have another relationship, and I think it was with his mate, and he was equally really horrific. And then she had therapy. But it was to me, that was such a story about these patterns that keep repeating.
Yeah.
How can you break them?
Yeah, you did mention in the book, off the top of my head, it was that even if something's bad, if you know it's almost like a safe zone. It's better than not knowing how to deal with something.
Absolutely.
So I'll just go with the violence that I know because
It's familiar. If it, like you were saying, things get normalized. So if this is what love looks like in your family, and also if you say you're homeless, you've got, you've been abused, you don't have a family to go to, and I talk about this. You meet someone in the hostel, and you're attracted to them. It's like this unconscious pull to someone who looks protective, but then they're really, really possessive, and then the same dynamics. And you think this is normal. This is what love looks like, is someone just wanting to track my movement.
And just the cross wiring of, violence means protection, even though it's violent. I get violent hit, but I'm also protected. It starts to cross wire. Because you said something, it's just something small as well, that it was about seeing an example of like what a relationship is. And it was almost that you see, if you haven't seen people resolve things, and I thought, oh yeah, that's interesting. So you've seen the violence bit, but you haven't been around relationships where people resolve things, just you haven't seen it. Because that was the thing with me when I was growing up, I was thinking, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd seen the bad bits, but I'd never seen this is how it gets. But to the point where I didn't know it was a thing to fix things properly. It was always violence. There you go, away, and then months later back together again. But I thought, you haven't seen somebody resolve something. Do you, with doing what you've done for as long as you have, do you overanalyze things?
Do I overanalyze things?
Can you watch a film and just see it as a film? If you've got friends talking about their partner, is there a machine going in the back of your head going, oh?
I mean, it's what I always say, like, if you ask me anything about, geography or history, I'm like, what? Hello.
Right.
But if you ask me, who did she go out with in 1984 and what was their sex like? I'll be like, yes, I'm your woman. So I care. That's what I really care about. So if I watch something, like I love programs like The Wire or The Sopranos or, they're really fascinating. I love psychological things.
Oh, it's almost like you're learning. You're almost on learning mode.
It's just really, as you get into the characterization. But do I overanalyze? My friends and family would say I'm a bit too interested in all these details because that's what I love.
Yeah.
So sometimes my son will be like, oh, I'm going to tell you this. Just listen. Just listen.
Right, don't analyze.
Don't interpret, please. But then if I don't say something, it's like, you got nothing to say.
Yeah.
but it's about validating people's feelings sometimes rather than.
And it must be weird that you must think, how are people viewing me? I'm not judging them because I'm just a friend. And are they worried that if they tell me something, I'm going to go into analyzation mode? So it could sort of work. There was a guy in America a couple of years ago. I was going to say something when he was talking about the glasses, and I have mentioned this before. And he was saying the psychological effect of all the plastic surgery. They're now starting to see it. And he explained it. He said because it creates the problem that they've already got, makes it worse. But he said because of the plastic surgery, we really started to learn about micro expressions, and it's removed the micro expressions.
Oh, yeah, people just have that plastic.
And he said so that then makes you feel like people aren't reacting right, which then thinks they're reacting because of me, which then makes, I've got to get this because maybe they think there's something wrong. And he explained it was perfect. He said, if you were to have a conversation with somebody about something very personal, but the person listening had sunglasses on, he said, that's what it's like permanently. Imagine all your friendship. You don't look at each other's eyes. He said, that's what the plastic surgery has done. It's taking away the micro expressions that you don't know you're seeing. We wouldn't have known 50 years ago. And I thought, if you just say, oh, listen, I've got to talk to you about something. And they kept their sunglasses on. You go, oh, right, yeah, I know I'm picking up on something. I don't know what it is. But he said, the plastic surgery is now... So people then think there's something wrong with the friendship because they don't... And I thought, oh, God, that's a terrible thing to start. But it made perfect sense. Yeah, there's the sunglasses. Just your face isn't moving. So I assume you don't care.
Well, there's an experiment in psychology called still face, where you show a mother who's just not responding, who's got that blank expression, and you see the baby get more and more frantic.
Oh.
So loads of these things that we do when you say, do I ever, I think I probably do look really interested. You both look really interested when you're talking to each other, and all those cues get picked up at a very deep early level, don't they? Oh, you're nodding back at me, you're smiling, you're mirroring my face.
I read some stuff, you might have heard about it. It was when, I think it was the Russians, they were basically trying to experiment with like creating good soldiers, and it did definitely happen where they would have babies and they would just leave them, and they would wrap them up tightly and they would leave them, and then they'd feed them, but they wouldn't give them any emotion. And they realized as they grew older, the years at 7, they started to become very aggressive because they had no connection to emotions. Like they
didn't
just
learn about
it worked.
Surprised
it was quite a big thing.
Balanced, yes, they didn't.
Yeah, but it was the military thing, and there's photographs as well. They got the kids wrapped up, and they just said, we're just going to leave them and not touch them, and just it's like so when I saw videos and they go to save animals and things, and I was trying to explain to somebody I was working on the door with about how people react really violently. He said when you see like a dog that's been abused and they go to pick it up and they get on their knees and they open their hands, and the thing, it doesn't know kindness. All it knows is things come towards me to kill me, so they're reacting they're about to die. That's why they're biting you and scratching the hell out of you, because they don't know any different. Yeah. So when I was on the door, especially early years, and I exaggerated everything because I'd only known immediate threats, whether I've been burgled 13 times, you're asleep and somebody comes. So you have to be that way. So when people look at Dom and go, oh, they're violent, you go, you have to do that job. You have to be comfortable with violence. So you do over-exaggerate, you do because you're on constant threat all the time. But it's exhausting because you can't, this is why Dom will get a bad reputation, because you can't turn it off when you finish work. See, the amount of times I got out of a car to people and they would look petrified. I'm humiliated by it now thinking about the stuff, but I just assumed that, you're going to try and kill me, so I have to get out and deal with it now. But that's damage. That's like emotional, because you don't understand anything in between. It's that and bad things happening to you all the time.
But that kind of experience has taught me never to have road rage.
Yeah,
because
I tell people, you don't know what's
My guys would go out with baseball bats. And I'm just like, okay, next time I feel like I'm just going to sing a little song for myself, because you never know.
I said that to people. You do not know what's happened that moment to that person. You don't have to just come out of jail for something and then you've got to give them the finger, which
I see, just to be contrarian, I always just point away and go, oh, hello, right? Yeah.
Well, I think,
and then they just go, what? And they just really confused.
Yeah,
every time.
I think the horn should just be removed from cars. That does nothing other than the noise of it, the pitch of it. I think what is even the point of that other than to annoy people?
We use it sparingly in this country. There are some countries where it's just.
Oh right, really?
It's the sound of arriving in New York.
Oh,
just people screaming, yelling.
Right, okay. Yeah. It's part of the
there are lots of countries where it's just it's like, I'm driving down the road, so am I, me too, everyone's just constant.
Oh, okay. Right, so to finish, I don't want to end up what do you do for your leisure time? What do you enjoy doing? What take pleasure in?
Oh, I love running. So that's a great, oh my gosh, that's just a fantastic release of all the tension. I think if I didn't, I'd probably be, I'd be like the guy who you worked with. Yeah. I'd be like grunting and starting to smoke even though I don't smoke. I love seeing my friends, love my family, love my cats. Right. I know Trump's going to make fun of me and tell me immigrants are about to eat my cats, but just normal things. I love shopping. I love watching TV. I love skiing.
What
I love
TV
traveling.
shows off the top of your head? TV shows off the top of your head?
TV shows. So I do, like I say, I do like the kind of crime dramas. But there are fun things too that I've watched. And sometimes, Game of Thrones, bit too violent, but that's quite interesting. What is it? Is it Pretty Little Lies or
no, don't know.
I don't know, or Big it's those kind of binge things with lots of character. A White Lotus, that was amazing, really fun. Have you watched it?
No.
Yeah, they're good, and they sometimes have a kind of sinister undertone, and then fun things like never mind the buzzcocks or whatever.
right, yeah.
Oh, and music. I love music. I listen to music all the time. Sometimes very corny, sometimes soul, sometimes gangsta. You got it. But please don't ever find my playlist. That is how I would be humiliated.
Well, I think that's most people.
Yeah, very private. The playlist is very private.
Everyone on their phone. Everything on their phone is
Have you got anything in the back now about another book? I know the other one only came out last year.
What I'd really love to write about is revenge.
So
justice, revenge, and the ways that people are using, they think they're doing something morally good.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I'm available to talk.
Very violent.
Yeah, there is something. I forgot somebody. It's not as pure as it seems to be doing something for moral. I forgot what the reason was, but that's what I've started to unpick. You can't fix everything, and you shouldn't be trying to fix it. And you shouldn't try to every battle. You can't. So like I said about getting annoyed, I realised that trying to bottle it up is not the right thing to do because it makes it 10 times worse. If I just said, "Excuse me," you go, "Oh right, yeah, that problem." If I invoke the Charles Kirbys, I'll just go, "Right, what would Charles do at this moment?" He'd probably say,
don't, no.
But it's also knowing yourself, isn't it? Like, oh my God, my heart is starting to go. You know what's going on in your body, and you go, okay, this is the feeling, and then I'm having this thought, and I'm going to go deal with it whatever way, rather than the red mist or the black mist.
In one sentence, he told me something, and and I've repeated this to other people because he'd see me getting annoyed, and he'd say, "Remember, whatever happens right now," he said, "you might be stood in front of a court in 3 months telling them what happened right now." And he said, "Is this going to be worth it?" And I did have a court case once, and it was like 3 months later. And I remember thinking, I can hardly even remember it, but it must have been important at the time. And now I'm stuck here. And it was years after, and he said to me, "Yeah, okay, do whatever you got to do. But just remember, you might be stuck in front of a judge in a few months. Is he going to have been that important?" And I thought, no, and I always thought, yeah, that works for me. It just thinks, it's not going to be, it's important now. No, it isn't. You'll be forgotten about. So you'll be doing something like revenge.
I want to go back to thinking about the men I've worked with as well as the women, because there were lots of kind of real justice, revenge crimes, which actually didn't help, didn't solve things, but it's a really human emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so where are you living? You come from up north?
No.
I thought Northampton?
No. I live in the Midlands. This morning I came from Oxford.
Oh, but where do you live? Roughly.
Well,
can you not say? It's not in London, is it?
No.
Yeah, okay.
But I work in London.
Oh, okay. Cool. Sorry, when everybody's outside of London, it sounds far away.
Far away, up north. I did live up north for a while. That was very interesting.
Oh, okay. Which part?
I lived in Nottingham, and I would do lots of assessments in places like Lincoln and really depressing ex-mining towns.
Yeah, oh God, yeah.
And talk about employment and the impact of communities men not having jobs.
Yeah.
You'd see a lot of deprivation and violence.
Well, we're going to keep an eye out for the rest of your books that come out. You've got an open door to come here.
Oh, it's a real pleasure talking to you. You guys could both very helpfully change careers and go into psychology.
Well, I think we're both at either different ends of this.
No.
We share the same spirit. We just tackle the world differently.
But it's also quite intuitive, isn't it? Like you just intuitively know how to listen or help or get to people's real. Yeah,
I've always in anything, whether personally or professionally, I try to seek out people where you share the same spirit, but you've just come from complete different backgrounds. Because you think you know stuff, and then somebody will just say something out the blue that you wouldn't have heard from anybody else that had the same life of you, and they'll say, and you go, "Oh, right, yeah, I hadn't thought." So you just want different inputs coming from even people from different countries who think differently. Have said things to me, but we do this, that, and I go, "Oh, right, yeah, no, I haven't thought," because you forget that you can only see inside your own experiences. Yes, so Charles is like the little on my shoulder. I'm just this blunt object on the other side. He doesn't know that, but but yeah. So you have an open door here anytime you want to come down.
It's been a real pleasure.
Are you doing anything yourself, audio wise, podcast wise? You've done a couple of interviews.
I've done quite a few interviews, but I haven't. No, I don't have my own.
No,
my own show.
No, that wasn't in your head. Anything like that? Talking to X? No.
That's interesting. You've just put it in my head.
I know people that would be good. Like we've spoken with John
really?
Wedger, who's dealt with child protection. I was trying to get him to do a show.
Interesting.
We recorded a show with him, and he's worked for Vice, River Pope Police, child protection for a long time. You two would be fascinating to speak to.
Wow.
We just spoke to him last week. Actually, he's
really?
the next show coming up.
Can I listen to it?
Yeah. And, we've had 2 shows with him before.
Oh, wow.
But CID for years, 30 years in the force.
Really interesting.
And just everything he says, it's like, oh, I didn't know you did all that. And as I said, especially the child protection stuff. When
Working with the
kids.
police, as I have done, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like they're more psychologically aware and trauma informed than,
Yeah, he talks about a lot about dealing with the kids and just the normalisation of the abuse and things like that. It's like, oh God. But every time you speak to him, it's like something new. So yeah, we just had him on next week. But we've had a couple of shows with him already. You should listen to it. I'll send you the links.
Yeah, do, please.
Charles, anything to say? No, you're happy?
I'm having a good time.
What are you doing today? Anything nice?
Yes.
What are you doing? Anything to say?
His thing's cool.
Football? Sunday football, no?
Yes. Oh, yes. North London Derby, actually. So I'll be listening to that.
North London Derby? What's that?
That's Arsenal versus Tottenham.
What's a derby?
That's 2 localish teams.
There's always some new championship.
/ rivals who play. That's just what it is.
Oh,
He's
okay.
only going for the violence, I know.
It's the only thing that gets me up nowadays.
I know a guy went to this talk about how useless, pointless this is. The copper tried to arrest him. He's for something just mouthing off, and the copper come up to him and he said, "I just knocked his hat off." I said, "Why'd you knock his hat? What was that going to?" He said, "I don't know." I thought, what the?
He knows why.
You know what that's going to do. Why antagonise the situation even more?
Anyway, so we.
Yeah. Okay. So, so thank you very much, and
You're
hopefully
welcome.
we'll get you back on again when your new book comes out.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very
Dan.
much.
Cheers. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.